What is good, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Terminator Training Show. This is going to be a single topic episode by popular demand through DMs as well as some YouTube comments, most notably on my video going over my 18X experience, which is episode 120 of the show. You can find that on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Pretty much went and broke down what I did from before I joined the Army all the way through graduation of the Q course and kind of some lessons and some of my experiences. And I'm going to do that same thing today with a single topic, and that topic is Ranger School. And there will be several subtopics, of course. Ranger School has a lot of different components. It's got different phases and different things to consider, but that is what I'm going to do today. Break down my experience, as well as when I go through each phase, I'm going to give you some like general recommendations and lessons and takeaways. And I might embed a couple of funny stories in here. I have a pretty detailed outline, but similar to my 18 X-ray episode, I probably will go mostly off the cuff. Though I'm just kind of make sure that I don't forget any big parts, but it's going to be mostly just by memory. And believe it or not, just typing the outline out helps me refresh my memory. So looking forward to getting into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about some general expectations, what you can expect based on your rank and your experience. And then I'm going to break down phase by phase, give you some key points, talk about some of the things I experienced myself, as well as some tips to kind of make sure you're ready for those phases. So without further ado, let's hop in. So some general notes on Ranger School. Every experience is going to be different. It does depend on your rank. It depends on what you've done before. It depends on, if you're coming from IBOLIC, which is basically to train as an officer in the infantry, or if you're coming from right after RASP, like you just got to Ranger Regiment and you haven't really gone to Ranger School yet, of course. So you're a private and you got to prove yourself by going to Ranger School. Those guys have a lot riding on it. Usually if guys have got to Ranger Regiment and they don't do well at Ranger School, that's a big red flag. And I'm not sure exactly how that's treated, but those guys they always have a lot of pressure on them and you can sometimes tell. But that experience will differ from being an E-6 Green Beret like I was when I went. And kind of similar to higher enlisted from the regular Army, E5 and above, you're going to kind of be treated similarly to the officers as well as the Green Berets as far as your leadership positions. You might not be expected to know quite as much, and you'll probably be more so given platoon sergeant positions than platoon leader positions in the last two phases, mountains in Florida, when they start doing platoon size ops. But yeah, should be pretty similar. The thing about going as an SF guy, so I am asked quite often, is it worth it to go to Ranger School as an SF guy? The reason I went to Ranger School is actually I didn't have a slot for it. We had two slots on our team, and our junior Bravo and our senior Charlie were going to be going. And our senior Charlie dropped out like 5 days prior. And so that slot opened up and my team sergeant said, "Hey, you want it?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I went on like 5 days notice, which was a complete nightmare getting the packing list all together because you usually have to buy a bunch of new things. And I was at Fort Carson 10th group and they just don't have the same like Ranger Joe's style packing list items there. So I ended up actually getting a lot of the packing list when I showed up a couple days early before Ranger School started, but neither here nor there. Went on that last minute Ranger School slot. And I would say for answering that question, should Green Berets go? If you get offered a slot and or if you get told by your team sergeant that you should go to Ranger School, yes, you absolutely should. Even if you don't get offered a slot, but you want to go to Ranger School and better yourself and make yourself more of a well-rounded professional, then it would be a good idea to go to Ranger School. It sucks. And you are definitely treated differently, especially by the fellow students. As a Green Beret, you're just expected to know everything. And you do know more than what most of the guys do, but you still don't know everything. And it can be a little bit exhausting. However, if you're a good dude and a solid team player, then it can be really, really good for peers. And you have a lot of leeway. Like you can be a dickhead to a lot of guys that really need someone to be a dickhead to them. And usually as an SF guy, it does depend on your personality and your overall character and your vibe. But usually you can get away with that kind of stuff and still get peered really high because sometimes you just need to have someone on your team that gives an ass kicking to people, not physical ass kicking, but a verbal ass kicking. Like, hey, dude, start pulling your fucking weight because you are hurting our entire squad / platoon, stuff like that. So may or may not have had to do that quite often, but yeah, it's going to be a little different as a Green Beret, but still, I think highly worth it. If you're not a Green Beret and you get offered a chance to go to Ranger School, or if you have a gumption to go to Ranger School, you're thinking about it, absolutely. I think there's no negotiation. I think it's a great, great school to go to, even though it sucks. And I'll get into kind of why, but you definitely will learn a lot about yourself. You're not going to become like a master tactician or like an incredible leader that's just going to lead brigades into combat or anything like that. But it definitely can help, especially if you're like on the less mature side and less experienced side. And, or if you are trying to go through your Army career and just better yourself and continue to, move up in rank, as well as just go and prove yourself that you can do things, that you can do hard things. And it's just a good look, especially certain units where not a lot of people have Ranger tabs. You stick out like crazy in a good way. So I would recommend going to Ranger School for pretty much everyone. And with that all being said, I'm going to talk about a bunch of bad things and good things about it. And there's more bad things probably than good things. But yeah, we'll kind of get into some specifics as we go. All right, so let's start with Darby, first phase. Starting with Rap Week. Rap Week is the first, I think it's Monday through Friday. And by the way, I went in 2016, October of 2016, like mid-October. So some of this is kind of vague in my memory. So just keep that in mind. Some of these things may be slightly different now, especially the PT stuff. I'm not really sure what they're doing right now. But also if I, miss something by a day, or if I say something is 5 days long, it's actually 4 days long, just letting you know in advance, it's just off memory. So not a big deal, still gets the point across. But we started with Rap Week. Rap Week, I think, is Ranger assessment process or something like that. It's pretty much just a week to test your fitness, mostly your fitness and your land nav, and make sure you don't freak out when you're high up or in water. And it is the main week where you just get tested on your physical ability. So showing up to Ranger School fit, this is why you do it. So you can get through Rap Week, because after Rap Weeks, everyone's kind of on the same playing field. Of course, the fitter you are going in, you have a lot bigger ceiling from which to fall than if you're kind of blade running through Rap Week. You're probably going to start falling off in mountain phase when you start going up and down mountains. But you definitely want to show up very fit. And like I said, and in my opinion, you should just be always ready to go to something like this. You're not necessarily ready to go like smash and get major pluses on everything, but at least ready to go and pass the required standards. They're not very hard. I think every soldier who considers themselves a good soldier should always be able to pass Rap Week at a moment's notice. If you can't, and you have a longer timeline, you learn earlier that you're going to selection, that you're going to Ranger School, then get yourself into that condition so that you can go and smash Rap Week. So pretty much start with a PT test. I will go through my experience and we'll kind of talk at the end about just some general things to consider. But I lucked out for sure. I got a very fair grader, and I literally did 49 push-ups, and he told me to get up. That's the minimum, but they also don't have guys go much more than that, or if at all more than that in my case. So I lucked out, did my push-ups, was told to get up, got to go on the push-ups. I, funny enough, went to Ranger School with another guy from my company. There was another guy on my team who went, my Bravo, but also another guy from my company. And he, unfortunately, did not pass push-ups. And then a few months later, he went to Delta Force selection that following spring, like literally 4 months later, and made it. And now he's a Delta operator. So that goes to show that the push-ups, at least the way they used to be, are not equal for everyone. And it can be luck of the draw. You might do 100 push-ups and get 48. You might do 49 like I did and get 49. And that's just how it is. It's usually just on the push-ups too. Typically the sit-ups, they tell you to get up when you're done. And I don't think many people fail the sit-ups, but I think the sit-ups was like 59 or 60. And same thing. Did 60 and told me to get up. And then we did the 6 pull-ups. They call them pull-ups, but they're actually chin-ups. Either way, you have to do 6. So whether it's pull-ups or chin-ups, you should be able to do that anyway as a soldier. And you do them in cadence, but still, like if you can do 8 or 9 good chin-ups, then you should be totally fine. But obviously, I recommend being able to do more chin-ups than that as a soldier. So did that, and then we did the 5-mile run. If you get a 33-minute 5-mile or faster, you get a major plus. And the benefit to getting major pluses is they cancel out major minuses. So anytime you get a negative spot report, you get a major minus. This could be a multitude of different things. I'll talk about some of the major minuses I got. But anytime you do something good, whether it's physical or land navigation or what I'll talk about in mountains, something that I did in the DFAC, you can get a major plus and they cancel out. So for example, in phase 1, Darby, I got a major plus for this PT test because of the run. I also got a major plus for land navigation. If you find all your points, I think it's all your points in land navigation. I can't remember how many it is. You get a major plus. If you win the buddy run, which we won the buddy run. The buddy run is a 2-mile run. I think you do it on the second day. It's a 2-mile run. You have to stay within an arm's length of your buddy that I think we chose who our buddies were, which I definitely made sure to choose someone who was pretty fast. And you also, the big advantage of that beyond the major plus is you do the buddy run right into Malvesti, which is the O course. And because you're arriving at the O course first, basically the first team that finishes the buddy run starts the O course first. And because the O course, they have to run everybody through it. And for a lot of people, it becomes a big time emotional event just because they mess with you so much. But if you're the first team through, they want to clear you out. So they didn't mess with us at all. We did all the obstacles one time, and then we just went and watched everyone just get destroyed. So definitely pays to be a winner in the buddy run. Of course, if you get a slow partner, then it's not going to go as well for you. But you also get a major plus for that. And then the last day, the 12-mile ruck is the last day of wrap week. And you do that at like 3 a.m., something around there. And the night prior, they basically smoked us until probably 1, let us go sleep for like a half an hour. And then they woke us back up and smoked us more. So we were like doing air squats and Y squats and rucks PT all the way up until about 15 minutes prior to the 12-mile ruck. And then they made us eat an entire MRE. So I ate an MRE 10 minutes prior to the 12-mile, which is not ideal. But luckily the 12-mile is done with 35 pounds dry. It's probably ends up being about 45 with water, but it's not that bad, but you are pretty smoked by the time you got there. So I did a 2:07 12-miler. That was definitely not the perfect conditions for performance, but if you get under 2.5 hours on the 12-miler, you get another major plus. So I had 4 major pluses and I got 3 major minuses, most of them for honestly using too much common sense and being a little bit ahead of what I thought. Basically, Darby is like the in-doc phase, and they try to stress you guys out, and they try to pretty much make it so that like you're in their army now. And if you are a little bit more savvy and experienced and a little more conscientious, if you're a little bit more of a critical thinker, if you have a little bit more common sense, sometimes you jump ahead and you implement that common sense when it makes sense. And you think it makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily make sense. And sometimes you get a major minus. So I opened my mouth a few too many times during Darby and therefore got 3 major minuses. However, I could have gotten another 3 major minuses because I had 4 major pluses and still been okay. If you get 3 major minuses in one phase, then you are going to be recycled. But like I said, they cancel each other out. So basically walked away +1 major plus. And then, land nav is relatively easy. You don't have to wear a rucksack for it. You can walk or run on the roads, and there's like ranger paths to pretty much every point, and you'll see a bunch of red headlamps. So the land navigation portion is super easy. And if you get all your points, like I said, you get a major plus. Additionally, I don't think you have to get all your points for this, but you have to get a certain amount of points. You don't have to go out for retraining. If you don't pass the first time, and I'm not sure what the standards are, but if you don't pass for the first time, you have to go out for retraining and you have to do it again. Basically, I think it's 1 more day or maybe even 2 more days, while the other guys don't do that. So that's another incentive to pass land nav. And then the only other thing worth mentioning during wrap week is the water and height confidence test. Me, I am not a huge fan of heights, so I did not like the ranger beam where you have to walk across the pond. You're probably 40, 50 feet up in the air, which doesn't seem that high. Like if you fell, you're falling into water, you got a life jacket on, but still, I just don't like those intermediate heights where I can like see an imminent fall, and I'm just not a fan. Never been a comfortable thing for me. But that was really the only uncomfortable part. Some guys do lose their minds in the water. You have to like jump in the water and ditch your weapon and flick. And some guys absolutely shit the bed on that somehow. It's not very hard. If you can tread water for a couple minutes, not even maybe 30 seconds, you're going to be good to go. And then some guys do lose their minds, like big time lose their minds on the beam. They just can't do it, or they get to the end and they really struggle to get onto the rope. You have to pretty much get onto a rope at the end that's kind of going down diagonal. You have to combat crawl like underneath the rope, touch the ranger sign, and then you have to hang, and they tell you to do a pull up, and you do a pull up or a chin up, a ranger pull up, aka a chin up, and then they tell you to drop into the water, and you drop kind of cross your arms and fall from maybe 25 feet or so. Not that bad. And then you swim, but you swim with a life jacket on, so it's not hard. And then you do the Tarzan, I think they call it, where you grab onto these two handles and you swing on this zip line all the way down. And there's a certain place where you have to let go at the right time, and you hit the water pretty hard. And so long as you don't let go way too early, it's pretty fun. I didn't really mind that much at all, just because I had secure grip on the actual handles, and it was a little less scary than just walking across the beam. But yeah, that was pretty much the other two things in wrap week to consider. The rest is all just physical stuff. After wrap week, then you go, if you're airborne qualified, you go and jump into Darby. Of course, if the weather's all right for it, we ended up jumping. That was one of the most terrifying experiences in my life, primarily because I hadn't jumped static line in like 3, maybe 4 years. I had been on a free fall team since I got to group and only jumped free fall. And even though it sounds more scary to those who haven't done free fall and static line, it's not. There's so much more that you are not in control of. You have less time to make decisions, and the ground is way more imminent. And so it was very terrifying for me, but walked away from that jump scot-free. And then we went into Darby. So you go to Camp Darby, and that's where you do your Ranger stakes, which when I went were not go or no go. It's like, I think 6 or 8 tasks. You have to disassemble and reassemble a 240 Bravo. You have to do immediate action on a 249, or it might be the other way around on those two things. You have to do some embedder stuff. You have to do a Claymore, like low crawl, where you set it in. You have to use the dagger, which is at least what they used to use for GPS, and a couple other things. I think now you have to get a certain amount of goes on those things in order to move on. You can get recycled if you don't, but you have plenty of time. Even when you're there, like I had not done immediate action on a 240 Bravo or disassembled a 249 Bravo in probably a few years before I did that. And you have plenty of time to practice it. And if you just practice and make sure you're good. For me, the only one I almost failed was the embedder. I got it done like 5 seconds to spare, just because I'm terrible at radios and I messed it up a few times. And I just wasn't used to the embedder at all, because we don't use embedders in group. But got goes on that. And I think now you have to get a certain amount of goes in order to get through it. Then it is FTX time. And this is squad-based tactics, squad-based movement, patrol bases, actions on. Actions on could be one of two things: ambush or raid. I think most of the actions on in Darby was ambushes, if not all. Ambushes are definitely easier to do well on than raids. There's just a lot more that can go wrong in a raid. But yeah, I got 2 looks, one as squad leader for actions on, basically setting in actions on and doing actions on for a road ambush, which was pretty simple. It was almost exactly like the things you get tested on at Small Unit Tactics, SUT, during the Q course. So that was pretty easy for me. Then I got another, you usually get 2 looks. It does depend on how the rest of your squad's going. Like if guys need extra looks to get their goes, they might give them their extra looks, but my squad was pretty squared away. So everyone just got 2 looks. And I think everyone, maybe all but one guy, moved on to the next phase. But my second look was movement, planning and briefing and movement. So basically took over in the patrol base, did my planning, did our movement. And then once we got to our place where we're going to do the ambush, they switched me out, and I got to go on that too. Usually you get assessed on a couple different phases of the entire day's mission. So you have your planning. So you have your patrol base activities, your planning, your briefing, your movement, setting in the ambush, doing the ambush. And then usually after the ambush, at least in mountain phase and Florida phase, they'll switch leadership out again for movement back to the patrol base and setting in the next patrol base. I don't think they did that in Darby, but I can't really remember. But anyway, got 2 goes, and that was pretty much the only remarkable things from Darby. Towards the end, you get Dog X, where they just have a bunch of hot dogs and you can just slam hot dogs. I can't remember how many you can get, but I think it's like 10 or 12. And I remember finishing some other people's hot dogs too. You just delete a bunch of hot dogs and then you feel terrible after. And then I think the next day is 8-hour pass. They let you go at like 9, or I want to say they let you go at like 9 a.m. You come back at like 5 p.m. So I went and ate a bunch more food. Then I got a hotel room for a few hours to go sleep, and it was glorious. You don't have to do that for sure, but if you want to go get some shut eye and enjoy some time to yourself, then get in a hotel. There's one right on post, and that would be a decent way to spend your time. But you obviously have to pay money for that. So do so at your own discretion. Overall, Darby is definitely the easiest phase because you are not quite as beat up, skinny, cold, hungry. It was also at Fort Benning. It was not in the mountains yet. So the weather was more favorable. It wasn't freezing cold. It was hot a few days and pretty much comfortable for the most part. So the fact that you are a little bit fresh and the fact that you're only doing squad-based movements and squad-based ambushes and squad-based patrol bases makes it so that Darby is definitely the easiest phase. After Darby, however, things start to get real. That's when you show up to mountain phase 2. All right. So this was like late October into November for me. I remember being in Mountain FTX when President Trump got elected in 2016. So like mid-November timeframe. And yeah, it was really cold. The year we went was extremely cold. The class behind us was even worse. And my teammate who recycled the first time through Darby, he was in mountain phase behind me. And there were a couple of pictures of them just like they call it full retard when they tell you to go and put all of your snivel gear on. They say go full retard. And it's like the best instruction ever, just because you can just put whatever you want on for snivel, which is all your gear that keeps you warm. But yeah, they got really, really smashed with cold weather. For us, it was a few nights like very close to freezing and raining. So that was terrible. The very first night, in fact, when we did, I think it's the Trail of Tears, you basically just walk straight up a mountain where you can like reach out and touch the ground in front of you. We did that in the pouring rain and it was cold. It was completely miserable that night. And there were a couple nights where it snowed a little bit, a couple nights where it rained. And then there were a few days that were really, really cold. Luckily, it wasn't snowing or raining on the days that were like 10 to 15 degrees, but that would have been rough. But either way, you feel twice as cold as you would normally feel just sitting here. Just because by that time, you're just super smoked from going up and down mountains. That's kind of when a lot of people that didn't really prepare well for Ranger School start falling off because the mountains are pretty brutal. And also, you're just underfed, you're underslept, and your body is just super sensitive to cold. And it sucks, especially when you do a long movement and then you guys stop for whatever reason and you're sweating and then you sit still. It's like you're sitting still trying not to move anything because you don't want your arm or your chest or your torso to like touch the inside of your shirt. So you try and sit perfectly still. Either that or you just move around a ton, but usually you're not allowed to do that. So, and they determine when you can wear snivel gear and when you can't. So there's certain temperatures that they abide by, but like, I don't think they factor in the humidity when it's humid and cold out. It just feels a lot colder. And I don't think they factor that in. So anyway, when it's 40 degrees, it feels like it's 20 degrees. And that's just kind of the reality of it. And it really sucks, but you can get through it. When you first get to mountains, get into your platoons, all that kind of stuff. By the way, you get a nice bus ride to mountains where you can rack out for a while. Even if you're airborne qualified, you can still do that. And it's nice. So mountain bus ride, always great. I can't remember how long it was, a few hours, but anytime you can rack out for a bit is a good time. So got some extra sleep. You get there, put into your platoons. During mountains, the DFAC is a little bit more robust, especially for breakfast. One tip that I have for mountain phase is get really, really good at build yourself a system for eating your food super quickly. Don't feel like you have to sit down and just take individual bites of individual things on your plate. Like what I would do, I can't remember exactly what my system was, but I had it down pretty good because you only get a certain amount of time to eat. And if you don't finish your food, you throw it away. And you really want to eat everything they give you. So I would like put peanut butter and jelly on my either my pancake or waffle or whatever the breakfast goodie was. And I would put my scrambled eggs all in there and I'd basically eat it like a taco and get it all down. And you just have to figure out a way to get it down. And some guys just can't. They never get to where they can eat it all. And it's unfortunate, but I think it's totally possible. You just got to man up and do it. On that note, a funny story, the major plus that I got in Mountain Phase was the result of me giving a dude the Heimlich. He was choking on his pancake, couldn't breathe. He was sitting right next to me. He ended up pushing his seat back and I kind of saw him out of the corner of my eye and I could tell that he like couldn't breathe because he wasn't making any sounds and his face was getting all red. His veins were sticking out of his neck. And so without really thinking, I just got up, gave him the Heimlich, and then we sat right back down and he literally grabbed the piece of pancake that came out of his throat onto it landed on the table right next to his tray. He grabbed that and ate it and then continue eating. We didn't even say anything. You're not allowed to talk in there. And the cadre came over to me and said, "Hey, thanks for doing that. Appreciate that. What is I think it was like, what company are you in?" And he said, "I'm going to make sure you get a major plus." And then he gave our table an extra like 5 minutes to eat. And it was glorious. He's like, "Guys, you guys are getting an extra 5 minutes to eat. Don't rush." And yeah, so that was a highlight of the DFAC in Mountain Phase. But you get a little bit more food in mountains, but the calorie expenditure is just so much greater that it doesn't really help all that much. And the FTXs are longer too. So before you get into FTXs in mountains, you do the mountain skills, mountain tactics. I don't remember what they call it, but you learn knots, you learn harnesses, you learn how to make pulleys 2-to-1, 3-to-1. You learn how to belay, climb, and things like that. It's kind of enjoyable, but you're just so tired and hungry at that point that it's not as enjoyable as it would be if you were well fed and well rested. But it's not too bad. Pretty good time and pretty easy. You just got to practice your knots. They do a knot corral where you have to get a certain amount of knots done in a certain amount of time, but they're all pretty simple. And if you practice a little, you'll have extra time to practice. And if you do that, you'll be totally fine. But some guys didn't, and some guys got recycled just for knots, which is unfortunate. Don't do that. Thereafter, you go into your first of 2 FTXs. Each FTX in Mountain Phase is 5 days long. I think 5 days and 4 nights or 5 days and 5 nights. Can't remember exactly, but you get a 1-day refit in between. My first look was a platoon sergeant for the very first mission of the first day, briefing, and then movement. And I wasn't 100% sure that I got to go, but I felt like I did pretty damn well. And the cadre gave me a good review when he switched me out, but he never said like, you got to go or not. Sometimes they do that, but I was feeling pretty confident that things went well. And ironically, that same dude who was my grader for that mission, ended up going to Delta selection with him about a year and a couple months later when I went to the spring selection class in 2018. And really good dude. And I was just glad that he wasn't a dickhead and didn't treat me like a piece of shit like some other RIs did to some people in that phase. Don't worry, we'll get into some RI shenanigans a little bit later in Florida. But got to go on that. And then my second look was during the second FTX, I think it was like day 6 or day 7, I was switched into platoon leader after the mission that we did for movement back to the patrol base and setting in the patrol base. And I remember it'd be a super cold night. I think it was like the second day of the second FTX. So we were all super tired and just miserable, and trying to set in a patrol base in those conditions is an absolute shit show. But again, when I got my AAR from my instructor, didn't know for sure whether I passed or not. Felt like I did pretty well. And so I was feeling pretty confident. And then also when you're a Green Beret, or if you're just kind of more squared away, if guys in your platoon think that you're more squared away, they will make you in Mountain Phase. You can choose your team leadership. So these are non-graded positions, but they help the team. So you have your Alpha team, your Bravo team. And so they'll make you a team leader if you're squared away. So almost every single day of Mountain Phase until the very end, when they said I was not allowed to be a team leader anymore, I was the Alpha team leader, which not ironically is in charge of navigation. So definitely a good way to get good peers and a good way to instill confidence in your guys. And obviously, if you're confident with land nav and you're skilled with it, you are pretty much in charge of not getting your team, your squad, or your platoon lost. And so it's a good responsibility to have if you like to be in control of these things. And believe me, some platoons get hopelessly lost all the time because they just don't have someone who's competent with land nav. But it is definitely exhausting because even though you're not being graded, you're still in charge of things, and I'm still navigating the whole time. So that was very, very fatiguing. And then I think it was the second to last night, they're like, okay, you can't be a team leader anymore. I was like, thank God. But then I got a third look. This was the very last day, last mission. We woke up at a patrol base and I was security team leader. Security team is basically the right and left security for either ambushes or raids. This morning was a raid. No, this morning was an ambush on a road, and they made me the security team leader. And I was kind of worried when they did that because usually when you get 3 looks, usually that third look is to kind of give you a chance to go to the next phase. Typically, they don't give people third looks if they've already gotten 2 goes. And I didn't know if I had 2 goes at this time. So I was a little bit freaking worried. And that mission went fine. I was basically the team leader for movement and actions. Actually, I was the team leader the entire time for briefing and planning, as well as movement, as well as actions on. And everyone got goes on that mission. What it turned out to be was our platoon was very squared away. So most of the guys in our platoon had goes already. And so the guys who hadn't gotten goes, they put them in leadership positions on that day. And then the other guys who had already gotten 2 goes, they added them to the team leadership just to make it so that mission went a little bit better. So they were kind of looking out for guys, which is not always the case, but it was the case when I went to mountains. For example, I believe 45 out of 47 dudes in my platoon got goes in mountains. So that is kind of uncommon. That's a very high pass rate, but that's why they put me in that leadership position for that last day. So I found out later, of course, they were like, yeah, you got 3 goes. Good job. Have fun in Florida. And that was that. So in mountains, biggest takeaways, already mentioned it, kind of show up to ranger school fit so that even though you're going to be depleted and sleep deprived, food deprived, and smoked and poopy faced, walking up and down mountains, if you're super fit going in, you have dropped pretty significantly by the time you get to mountains. But if you're not super fit going in, you have a much lower ceiling from which to fall before you're down to baseline and below baseline. So even though you're not in your perfect operating condition physically, by the time you get to mountains, if you show up fit, you're going to be a lot less miserable that entire time because the rucksacks are heavy. There's a lot more extra equipment, specialty equipment that you have to pass around and carry. And if you are blade running through rap week, or you just show up not very good at rucking or not very experienced with a ruck on, you're going to really, really, really hate life in mountain phase. And you're probably going to drag your team down. Also volunteer for things, especially if you are more competent. So even though I talked about earlier being the alpha team leader, it was very grueling and mentally fatiguing. It still helped us out because I would rather be the person in charge of that than put someone else in charge and then end up getting lost. Or if it's the Bravo team leader, end up not having accountability of something and the whole mission gets a no-go, or any number of different things that can affect the success or failure of the entire platoon. So you'd be surprised at how a couple people not doing their job, even if they're not in like graded leadership positions, can drag your platoon down. So volunteer for stuff, especially if you know that you are good at it, even if you're smoked. It's usually the better of 2 evils than just being right rifleman with your head down and hoping everyone else does their job. And then help people, even if they freaking suck. So just adding on to what I just said about the success or failure of the platoon can come down to a couple people. If you have a few guys that are just not able to carry their weight, or if they're just all over the place, they don't listen to instructions or whatever it is, immature, you still need to help those people because it's going to make everybody in the platoon's life easier, even though it goes against every fiber of your being to help out someone who you would consider a shitbag. Until they are either no-go'd and recycled and no longer in your platoon, or they quit, help them out and pick up their slack, because it's just going to make everyone's life a lot better, even if it makes your life and the other guys who are squared away's life a little bit more difficult. Definitely would consider doing it. So the end result in mountains, 3 looks, 3 goes, and I got 1 major plus for helping that dude out not die with a Heimlich maneuver, which brings us to the final push, Florida phase. So Florida phase, we got there, and the Florida DFAC is even better than the mountain DFAC. You get a little bit more food. We were there around Thanksgiving time. So I think it was right before we went out for the FTX, like 2 days prior to that was Thanksgiving. So we got a big Thanksgiving feast, which is amazing, but you're still just like so deprived and you're so skinny and you just want to be done. And we were going to graduate Florida phase right before Christmas break. So it's like, I'm done after this, and then it's Christmas break, and then it's back to my normal life, Ranger school over. Or so I thought. So Florida, this happened to be a very, very cold year. It was even colder in Florida than it was in mountains. So I remember most nights it was probably 15 to 25 degrees, and the terrain in Florida is not quite as bad. It's actually not bad at all. There's a bunch of sand, which is kind of demoralizing, but it's super flat. So you're not working quite as hard. So you're just a little bit more cold in general, even when you're actually moving. And of course, you're super tired. My particular platoon in Florida, we probably got 8 or 9 hours of sleep total in the 10-day FTX. So that was also a big factor. I remember when we got back to a patrol base after a mission each night, they would administratively pause you just to get sensitive items checked, all the different team gear. That was a sensitive item. They would go through and make sure that we had it all. And I remember standing, you pretty much line up half your team on one side, half your team on the other side, or half the platoon on each side. And you are standing behind your rucksack and just kind of waiting for your item to get called out if you have one. And I literally fell asleep standing up, tumbled forward over my rucksack. I don't remember what night this was, probably like night 6 or 7. And that definitely gave everyone a laugh, but you don't get in trouble for doing stuff like that. You would get in trouble for falling asleep on like duty or something like that. Maybe sometimes if you get caught, but for that kind of stuff, they just kind of laugh. Even the RIs found it funny. So that was my low light experience with sleepiness in Florida. The 2 missions that you have to walk through swamps, the Weaver, and I think the other one is the Boiler. Those are definitely the worst ones. And I'll kind of talk about my experience here in a second with the Weaver. Those are the 2 worst days. I think it's like day 7 and day 6 and day 8 or something like that. And sometimes it's so cold that they don't actually have you walk through the swamp. For us, it was like just warmer. The water temperature was just warmer than what the minimum is. So we still had to walk through the swamps. And yeah, those ones are pretty brutal just for many different reasons I'll get into here in a second. But going back to the beginning, we actually jumped into Florida. So the downside of being airborne qualified in Ranger School is once you finish mountains, if you're not airborne qualified, you get a bus to Florida. And I think it's like 4 or 5 hours of time where you can just sleep. If you are, you get to jump into Florida if the weather is good enough, and you don't get any of that sleep. And then you also have to go jump. I was the very first chalk out of the bird. And long story short, there was only 1 chalk that went out of the bird that day because of the wind. So they threw us out. The dude literally did the wind call and said 18, which is 5 knots higher than the minimum. And then they still sent us out, which I was actually kind of excited to jump because we had been race tracking forever, just driving around the drop zone in circles. And I was about to puke and I had to pee really bad. So I was like, get me out of here. I don't care if we land or if I jump, just get me out of here. So we jumped and I came in like a sack of bricks. I had my wallet in my back right pocket and I came in kind of backwards. I grabbed the front of my helmet so that because I figured if I didn't, my head was going to whip back and smash the ground. So I grabbed the front of my helmet and landed feet, butt, and then kind of like barrel rolled over and right on my wallet. So I had a big ass bruise on my butt for the rest of Florida. So that was pretty funny. I was very, very pissed that they threw us out. And like I said, they didn't throw anyone else out. They're like, oh, wow, we just threw those guys out in way too windy weather. And we're going to hurt someone if we throw anyone else out. And I think a couple of people did get hurt on that jump. And so they stopped. But that really did not make me happy, especially because I don't like jumping. But luckily, this time around in Florida, I did not have to jump into the FTX. So that was my only jump during this round of Florida. But the way Florida's set up is you have one FTX, and I believe it's 10 days, maybe 11 days, and there's no refit in between. So like I said, in mountains, you get a refit in between where you come back for a day and kind of just regroup, sleep in the barracks, eat at the DFAC, and then you go back out. In Florida, you're just out for, I think, 10 days, maybe 11. But anyway, again, day one, I was made the platoon sergeant for a mission. This particular mission, I was not in charge for planning and initial movement, but like after the first initial movement, they switched out leadership and I became the platoon sergeant. And this was also at the exact same time, it was starting to get completely dark out. And the quality of the nods, the night vision goggles that they give you at Ranger School is just very, very low. So you can't really see much. It's one nod. You shouldn't even call it nods. It should be called a nod. PVS 14s, I believe they're called. And you can barely see anything, even when the loom is good, when there's like a decent amount of moon out. This night there was none. And like I said, it just got dark and guys were already just all over the place. The first people in leadership just messed a lot of different things up already. So basically my mission was to try and herd cats and get people back in line. Anyway, that didn't happen. We took indirect fire and all hell broke loose. And then we ended up finally getting ourselves together. And then I was also still in charge for actions on. We showed up like 2 hours late to where we needed to be. And so I did not get told directly that I got a no-go that night, but I was pretty sure that I did not get a go that night. And so my next look would have to be a go. Luckily in Florida, they assign team leaders. It's not up to the students to pick who the team leaders are. So I wasn't being a team leader every single day. I got assigned a couple minor leadership positions. Like I was medic a couple times and I was various different team leaders, but it was not every day. So that was good. But my second look, I think it was on day 6. It was on the first swamp mission. I think it's Weaver. It could be the other one, but we're going to call it Weaver. And I was the platoon sergeant for patrol base operations, as well as the brief, as well as the first part of the movement, which happens to be moving to the boats where everyone loads on the boats and getting onto the boats and going down the river. And then right when we got to, you basically take this pretty long boat ride down the river with your paddles and whatnot. And you get out and you store your boats and then you do your Weaver mission where you go through this swamp that is, depending on how much water, anywhere from like mid-thigh deep to waist deep, sometimes maybe even chest deep. I'm sure there's like restrictions on how deep it can be just to make sure people don't die. But we did that and I thought I did pretty damn well on that one. I was like pretty sure that I got to go. However, I did learn later that I did not get a go because I failed to meet the time hack from when we showed up at the boats to when everybody was loaded on the boats, and also noise discipline. Apparently we made too much noise. So also got a no-go on that. Those are my only 2 looks in Florida, time 1. And if you've been paying attention, both of them were no-goes. So guess what? I got a no-go. I got recycled from Florida, and it was probably the worst moment of my life when I heard that, because I was pretty sure I got to go on that second mission. And guys who hadn't got goes yet, most of them got another look on the very last mission. So I figured I was good because I didn't get that look on the last mission. But it turns out not many of the instructors, the RIs, really liked me during Florida at all, at least not in this company. I'll talk about my next time through here in a second. But I did not have a very good reputation because, again, it was honestly thinking with too much common sense and bringing too much real world experience into the picture. One example, I was the medic on this one. This was my last time as medic because they realized that I was a medic after this, an SF medic, and they switched me out. They would never let me be a medic again, but I was medic on this one. I think it was like day 2, maybe day 3. And the medic's not a leadership position, but you're always hanging out with, I think it's the platoon sergeant that you're hanging out with. So like I would try and help him like with some decision making and kind of herd cats and stuff like that, because you could always use someone to help. But anyhow, we were walking down the road to our next raid site, And we took IDF. That just happens, indirect fire. And they have like RD sims that they put off. And then they always go around and they like select who's going to be casualties. So as a medic, of course, I was kind of in charge of doing some triage on the casualties, seeing who could walk, seeing who needed help walking, seeing who needed to be carried, and seeing who was fine, just kind of making sure that we had that all in order. So I went and did that. And we had one guy who took shrapnel apparently through his rib cage and had a sucking chest wound. And so I assigned someone to help him, like put his arm around your shoulder and help him walk or run, break contact until we probably get RD simmed again. But anyway, apparently I was notified by the RI who's in charge of this that there's no way in hell that anyone with a sucking chest wound could ever walk, even with help from someone. This guy needs to be put on a litter or carried like a fireman's carry over the shoulder. And I told him, no, that's not true. Actually, a lot of guys get shot in the chest and they don't know they're shot in the chest until the firefight ends several minutes later or even longer than that. So not only can you usually walk with assistance for a while with a sucking chest wound, especially because we had already treated it. I already gave him a chest seal as well as needle D. So that's like the immediate treatment for a sucking chest wound. And we were carrying him, but apparently you can't do that, even though I've literally heard many, many stories of guys not knowing that they got shot somewhere in the box that gave them a sucking chest wound. You get a pneumothorax, is what it's called, known in the civilian world as a collapsed lung. Basically, air is just filling up the space inside your rib cage around your lung, and it's making your lung unable to expand. But you can do remedial action treatment on it, and also usually a guy can at least move with assistance for a couple 100 yards before he needs a little bit more definitive care, which of course he ends up needing more definitive care. But right then and there, I was like, this guy's ambulatory. He just needs a helper. And apparently that was not okay. And I got in a little bit of a argument with one of the RIs, just telling him based on my experience that people are definitely able to be ambulatory, at least with a helper, when they get shot in the chest or when they get some sort of sucking chest wound. And apparently that was way too much common sense. And so I got a major minus for that. And then later that night, no, this was after my second go or my second no-go. I also got a major minus for literally my nods were so foggy that I couldn't see anything. So I flipped my nod up and took my little glasses lens cleaner to try and make it less foggy. And then I put it right back down, and an RI just happened to be behind me when I did that. And he gave me a major minus for not having my nod down. And needless to say, I was not very happy about that. And I made that known. And so I didn't have the best reputation that time through Florida. So I got a no-go. Essentially how it worked was it was like early December, and Florida gets done faster than Mountain Phase behind you. So you have to all kind of end at the same time going into holiday block leave. So we had like a week still in Florida before holiday block leave where we're in recycle status. So essentially all you do is eat, sleep, and be depressed. To give you an idea too, my company or platoon in Florida, 6 out of 47 guys got goes that first time through. So it was a complete bloodbath. Like I said, we got 9 to 10 hours of sleep the entire time. So experiences definitely vary, and I'll get into some reasons why here in a second. But all 6 of them also got goes on the same mission on the very last night. The one that I thought maybe I would get a chance if I hadn't got my go yet to be on. Anyway, so that was unfortunate, and we were in recycle status, super depressed. And then I went home for Christmas. Won't get too much into that. Basically just ate and drank and slept the whole time. So I came back to Florida the second time. Very, very depressing. You go back down to Benning, then they bus you to Florida, and you're just driving right back in there. It's like deja vu because you were just doing that, in this case, a month and a half ago. So I almost didn't even want to go home for Christmas. I wanted to just start Florida again and get it over with. But anyway, that's not how it works, of course. So we went back, and second time through Florida, like I said, I had basically just been eating the entire time. It was the fattest I've ever been. I could not stop eating. Was basically sleeping all the time, doing a bunch of drinking, and went back, and I was a lot less hungry, a lot less tired. And also, this time through Florida, I was moved to a different company, which is common after you get recycled. I think it happens to everyone when they get recycled. And it was a much more professionally run company. And also, we got probably 5 to 6 hours of sleep almost every night compared to 8 to 9 to 10 hours the whole FTX last time. So that helped. And just the fact that we weren't hungry anymore. Even when I got done with Ranger School, I didn't have issues like going super crazy with eating just because we had the Christmas break and I got that out of me when I was home for Christmas, knowing that I had to go back to Ranger School. But anyway, the very first mission, I was platoon leader for movement and actions on ambush, which was like my bread and butter because ambushes are a lot more straightforward and easy to pass than raids. Of course, people still mess them up, but in Florida, I would say, if I remember correctly, like 8 out of 10 of the missions were raids, and the other 2, which is one that I was on, was an ambush. So got us to the ambush site late in the ambush, did a bunch of things that I learned at SUT that were more advanced than Ranger School stuff. And the RI that talked to me afterwards was like, dude, that was freaking awesome. You definitely got to go. Don't mess up. And so on and so forth. And that was my only look the entire time. So day 1, got my go. And then 9 more days as being right rifleman. But like I said, the cadre during that phase were a lot more professional. And that time through, I believe it was 50 guys total in my platoon and 47 got goes. So you can probably guess that the whole mood and the ambiance and just like the morale was totally different that second time through. And it was great. And we got done late January and graduated. Graduation was pretty unremarkable, but yeah, that's pretty much how it went down. What I would say is, although most of the things I just talked about sound like Ranger School really sucks, and it does suck while you're in it, looking back on it, it's actually pretty fun to reminisce. And you definitely learn a lot about yourself. You definitely learn a lot about how to manipulate and lead and influence people that are super unmotivated and hungry and tired and miserable and don't want to be there at all. If you can lead those people, if you can get those people to do what you want to do, you can pretty much lead anyone. You can pretty much get anybody to do what you want to do, tactically at least. And so that's like the biggest thing that I learned from Ranger School. And it does also help with career progression. It does help if you are like a Green Beret and you potentially want to go and take the long walk and go to the next level. Although this is not like an official thing, they do tend to pick more guys with the Ranger tabs than not, as well as dive bubbles. If you have a Ranger tab and a dive bubble, you still have to go and crush selection, of course, but it seems as if they do favor guys with Ranger tabs and or dive bubbles at that particular selection. But again, I don't know that for sure. That's just kind of word on the street. So regardless of whether you are just a new guy in the Army or you're SF guy or you're an officer and you want to go SF, but for whatever reason you haven't gone to Ranger School yet, it's probably a good idea to go. Even if you don't go, though, like you're going to be able to go once you get to group if you want. There's not a lot of guys fighting for Ranger School slots. So pretty much anyone, especially if they do enough time in the Army, you probably are going to be able to go to Ranger School at some point. And relatively speaking, relative to how many people have ever been in the military, in the Army, I should say, I guess Ranger School is open to other branches of the military, but anyway, relative to how many people have been in the Army, not a lot of people have Ranger tabs. So it's pretty cool to kind of be in that minority. So that was my take on it. That was my experience. Hopefully you guys got something good out of that. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode. Till then, Terminator out.